Hey, what's up, Super Simps, and welcome back to another episode of Squid Game, a SimplyPodLogical podcast.
Hello.
How are you doing,
Which
Cristine?
one of us lives? Which one of us dies? Only one winner can remain.
I would let you win.
Aw, sweetie. Okay.
What's going on? Everyone's talking about this new Netflix series, Squid Game. It's this 9-episode, each an hour-long Korean television series or Netflix series, streaming series. In a nutshell, the premise is a bunch of people on the brink of financial ruin are invited to participate in a game, which is playing a series of children's games, which they agree to out of desperation to win money. And what they don't know is by losing or being eliminated from the game actually means they will literally be killed, and rich people are doing this for fun.
Yeah, so elimination equals death in the game, as opposed to being eliminated from like a harmless game.
Yeah, so we just watched the show. This
Spoilers.
is going to be full of spoilers.
Yeah,
Only,
obviously.
Yeah. If you plan on watching it, don't listen to this yet.
Exactly.
Actually, the first thing we should probably talk about is how we watched the show, because this has kind of become a debate as well. So it's Korean. It has Korean actors filmed in the Korean language, right? So there's been debates about the best way of consuming the show if you are English speaking. I'll admit that both of us watched it with the English dubs on, right? Mm-hmm. I think you were editing photos for something.
Yeah.
During part of it.
Although, like, I can appreciate, and I did for some of it, put on the translation of the subtitle. So, like, watching it in Korean, but with English subtitles, just to kind of see if there was a bit of a difference. But I spent the majority listening to the English translated audio, which from my understanding of just like reading other people talk about it, like is not the best way to understand like the intricacies and the nuances. So I just acknowledge that, but that's how I consume a lot of content, because I'm often doing something as I'm watching something else. So I need to hear it as opposed to read it.
So I went back and watched the last episode again with English subtitles instead of the dubs, and I thought it was better.
Right. Okay.
So if I were to go back in time and watch the show again, I would do it with subtitles instead of dubs. So maybe I would recommend that to anyone who hasn't seen it. And I know it's opened up the door to a whole conversation about not just what gets lost in translation when you go from one language to another, but I know there's debate about some sort of like cultural references or the importance of some words that just a quick translation with some voice actors isn't going to come across in the translation, right?
Yeah, and from what I understand, just reading about this and the reception to it as well, is that there's a lot of culturally significant like meaning and messages and symbolism that we as Westerners may not understand or pick up on at all. So there's maybe some of the story lost that we don't see as meaningful. So like there's also that, from looking at it from our perspective, like maybe we don't understand, like there's more layers than we know.
Maybe there aren't more layers.
Well, I'm just reading like other people's reactions to it, and that's kind of their take on it. People who have other.
I'm just saying, just because we don't understand it doesn't mean we should assume there's much more complexity.
All I'm trying to say is in this podcast, we're going to talk about our understanding of it, but it doesn't mean it's a holistic, like I'm sure there's more layers to it based on what I read that I just don't pick up on. That's all.
Yeah. And one thing I do wonder about is just the significance of the children's games in it, right? So the series of, like, there's like red light, green light, which anyone in North America would know, I think. Tug of war is a pretty universal game.
Hopscotch.
But this did they play hopscotch?
Over the glass.
I mean, that wasn't.
Well, a version of hopscotch.
It's a pretty fucked up version of hopscotch.
It's all fucked up.
But like the first, or I guess spoiler, the last game they play is the eponymous Squid Game. And I have no idea if that has some sort of symbolism or significance that I'm not aware of. It's basically what North Americans would kind of recognize as tag, except it's more complicated. Like there's the aggressor wants to push someone out of a box, but they can only hop on one foot until they get to a certain part of your drawn out circle, or Yeah, so it's a little more complicated than tag. I wonder if there's some meaning there. And actually, I wonder if seeing a show built around these kids games, maybe here's one discussion item for us. Do kids still play games like this? Like, is our kids in playgrounds still playing Duck Duck Goose and Red Light Green Light, or are they just playing Fortnite and Among Us on their phones?
That's a really good question. I mean, I'm 32 years old, so I don't know the answer.
Don't know.
But when I was growing up at camp, a lot of similar games like that, or games with a parachute where you have to sit under it, or versions of Duck Duck Goose, I played that all the time at camp because it was one way to pass the time and also make friends, or try and force you to make friends anyways, you know?
Did it work?
No, we all killed each other. No.
Did you play Duck Duck Goose or Goose Goose Duck?
I don't. Is there a distinction?
Never mind. Yeah, I played the same games, and
Yeah.
I think well, we didn't have phones as children
Right.
yet, right? And I guess most people aren't giving their very young kids phones, so they must be finding ways of entertaining themselves somehow. A big one for me in Ottawa, Canada, was with a tennis ball. There's a lot of different games you could play just with a tennis ball and a wall. And I felt like they had like crude names kids would give games. I can't really remember. Like, I think
Wasn't
one was
there
called like Red Ass.
I remember that.
Do you remember
and
that?
It was basically about assaulting other players with the tennis ball, right?
Well, I guess that was the punishment.
Right.
So you would throw a ball against the wall, and I guess you take turns, and if you missed it, you lost, and the person you're playing against you would have to stand against the wall.
Right.
And they would get to throw it as hard as they could at your back.
Just normal child behavior.
It's totally normal.
Another one I remember was when people would take their hands in the cafeteria in high school, just to put this in context, and someone else would take a knife and stab in between their fingers.
Who has knives in high school?
The cafeteria.
Oh, like butter
Yeah,
knives?
like a butter knife.
Okay.
Sorry, not like weapon knives, but just like a knife that would be in a cafeteria because you're eating food.
Okay.
Or they'd take a set of keys, whatever it was, and just
yeah.
stab in between every finger. So you don't want to move your finger, but you also have to trust the other person not move. I never played because I was like, this is actually ridiculous. But I watched people play, mostly boys, from my memory.
Showing how tough they are.
And like it was fucked up. That like this was a way to spend your time, but also like potentially hurt each other, and maybe they like that.
Yeah, would not recommend. There's a famous scene in the movie Aliens, Cristine, where a robot plays that game with a person's hand.
Really?
And I guess the way they filmed it is they must have just like sort of sped up the footage. But I have a very vivid memory. It's a
Okay.
very famous scene, I think. I did not. I'm sure I've done that at some point in my life. Please don't do that. It's
probably
very
have,
stupid.
Yeah. It's very stupid. Okay, but in that context, kids play innocent games because they...
But
they're
these aren't
bored.
very innocent games, though, are they?
Sorry, let me rephrase that. Actual kids, not teenagers, might play innocent games that they perceive to be innocent because they're bored and they want to have fun with their friends, and they're also facing peer pressure to play and be good at a game. And I think that increases when you get older. What kids and high schoolers don't have in common with the people in the movie is that they are not yet facing life hardship consequences that the movie is trying to really put into perspective. And so this brings us to like the main plot of the movie was play these games, fellow adults. They're not kids. Or continue to live your life in poverty where you are struggling, you're facing hardships, and it's basically impossible for you to lead a successful, happy, productive life given your circumstances. So you have two options. You can play these games and maybe have the chance of winning so that you don't have to live a life of poverty. The odds are like very slim, which you learn through like how and why those odds are extremely low and most people die.
Well, there's 56 players in the game,
Yes.
and one of them ends up winning all the money.
Yeah.
That's how it's set up. The whole issue of choice, though, I think the whole point of how the game is set up and the commentary it is making on capitalist systems, they really stress, or the people who've set up the game are saying, like, you've chosen to be here. You agreed to be here. And they even give them the opportunity to leave if the majority of players agree to leave. And they do leave at the end of, like the first episode or second episode?
Yeah, and so there's kind of like a break in the story, a reprieve
But
before.
they choose to come back, right? But I think what the series clearly wants us to take from this isn't really a choice at all when you have all these people on the brink of financial ruin and such desperation. is it really a choice at all, right? And I guess you'd say the same thing about like for someone who like the underclass of society whose only option to survive is to work some job where they are treated terribly and not paid a living wage. What is their choice? Is their choice not to work at all? You can't move to the woods and try to like live off the land. That's not something that really makes sense in in our current time, right? So I think it's sort of a parallel to that, this idea like, oh, you've chosen to be here. You don't have to work for the man. But like, really, what is the alternative? A lot of people's only choice to survive is to work under terrible conditions.
Yeah, and I think on the surface level, this series is a commentary on capitalism and inequality. And that's pretty obvious just based on the conditions of the players and everything. But I found what Ben was saying to be the most interesting part, where it looks like the players are given the illusion of choice. And I think in part that makes the VIPs, which is the capitalists at the top, feel comforted in a sense, in a twisted sense, because they feel like, oh, we've given these players, workers, the vulnerable people, a choice, so they didn't have to do this. So we feel therefore less responsible for the harms incurred to them because they didn't have to. But what they're willfully ignorant to is the conditions under which the lower class or the players here have to face. Because this illusion of choice is often something that I see in like mainstream conservative political arguments where people will say it's equal opportunity. Anyone could have gotten
the free market,
there.
baby.
Yeah, like you see this kind of just like baseline, plain, easy to make argument that's like, oh, it's equal opportunity. Anyone could get this education in public school and then therefore progress to this. But like, no, it's not. I think what this show shows is that if you're the one saying that, you probably are in a more privileged position in order to be saying that. Because if you were born under different circumstances in a different family, and there is some luck involved, and I think that's kind of what the moral of the story is, it's not just about being the best at tug of war, because you could die even if you're on the wrong team, if you're on the worst performing team, that's not your fault. Right? And that could be a parallel to like your family and your family's wealth, what kind of wealth you were born into, and all these other social systems at play. So I found that to be the most interesting, like deeper meaning, is that the illusion of choice is just something that the upper classes say exists, almost because it reifies their hard work and they feel better, and it justifies them saying, well, you down there just didn't work as hard as me. So I think that is an important lesson that everyone can take away from this series that I really enjoyed.
Yeah, and the reality is like people do have choices, but their choices are constrained by their material conditions in the societal structures
by their social
around
conditions. Like it's sociology 101. And I feel like if I was in first year soc, or when I was in first year soc, I remember we watched a movie called Drive that was about race relations. Was it Drive? No, Crash. Sorry. Wrong mark. Similar concept.
Terrible movie, by the way.
Okay, but at the time, it was a movie that provoked a lot of thought about race relations.
Sure.
And I remember we had to use like different sociological theories to deconstruct what was going on in that movie and explain some of the inequalities in society, but like apply it to a movie that made it, I guess, more fun from a student's perspective. And I appreciated that because it brought like boring theory, quote unquote, into something real. And I wonder if students right now are using Squid Game, which is like a fun kind of twisted concept that's entertaining to watch as a show, obviously. But applying different sociological theories to kind of pick apart the underlying constraints in society and argue against like meritocracy. Is it a lie? And so on.
And I think it's speaking to an audience that already, probably thinks we should eat rich people, so I'm not sure if it's converting anyone to a different way of thinking, right? Like when you talk about the choice thing, I'm always reminded there's this famous Ben Shapiro clip.
Ben Shapiro.
Where he's asked, so this is a conservative commentator on YouTube, right? He's asked like what people should do if they own properties in Florida that might be underwater soon because of climate change. And he's just like, they should just sell the houses and move. And it's like, you fucking idiot. Who are they going to sell it to? It's going to be underwater. in the like. Do you know what I mean? But this idea that every answer can come down to you have personal choice and responsibility to do anything, and like no charitable interpretation or understanding of like the conditions in which people are in because of other social forces. It all comes down. It's wanting to reduce everything down to personal choice and decisions and responsibility, which often is a useful way of looking at the world and things and how to, people can do things to bring themselves out of poverty, right? So like you also don't want to completely discourage that. Yes, sometimes.
Yeah.
But you also, anyone who reduces human behavior to either of those two extremes, it's like all social structure or it's all personal choice agency. It's a lazy way of looking at the world to go in either extreme direction, I would say. Yeah,
it's lazy, and it's also very easy for someone like Ben Shabibo to say because of his current conditions, Shabibo. Right?
You've been watching too much of Son. Eh?
I feel like everyone refers, even like other shows I watch. No,
I think he's the only person.
H3 refers to him as Shabibo. Anyways.
Can I tell you my least favorite thing about Squid Game?
What?
So you kind of brought up the motivations of the VIPs, of the creators of the game, the rich people who I guess get off on watching these poor people kill each other to win money. I thought the motivations of the VIPs and the founder, what do they call him, the host, was kind of cartoonish in a villain sort of way. And it wasn't really this nuanced view of like how rich people use underclasses just, when it serves them from like a financial or economic perspective. It kind of reduced it to like, this is a major spoiler. Like last episode, you find this out. The guy who started the game was like, I had so much money that everything was boring to me. And I got together with my other rich friends and we thought this was one thing that brought us a little bit of joy. And that felt kind of...
I hear what you're saying. I also think the show in many respects was a clear exaggeration of reality.
Sure.
Like they were exaggerating the relationships between people at all levels. Like the way that the lower classes or the players would get mad at each other seemed so extreme and immediate. I don't know if that would happen that extreme in real life that quickly, right? Like everything was exaggerating from the visuals to the acting. And I hear what you're saying. I think maybe that could be just a little bit weak, that if the idea is that super rich people literally are just so bored and kind of dumb that they would...
The only thing that entertains them is watching poor people get killed. Like, I think that's a little on the nose.
But there might be like another deeper interpretation you could take from this, which is maybe billionaires get joy off of growing businesses that ultimately result in the exploitation of labor of the underclass, for example. So like there's a different way that you could perceive this in a more literal sense that isn't as like that's not as literal as like let's just watch people kill each other for fun.
Yeah. And I should say, like, I'm not sure if they were trying to remind the viewer of this, but anyone watching this series is sort of getting off on the same visuals the VIPs are. Did you kind of get the impression they like wanted the audience to think about that, or not really? Because I will say a lot of the series is pretty graphic, and gory, and lots of death. And I know that's not something you would typically watch.
And I know people were surprised when I kind of alluded to the fact that I've been watching this. You guys listeners, thank you for calling me out, reminding me that I don't like gore. You are correct. I don't. And it's kind of like, I see this as like Saw, that series when we were growing up. Saw was disgustingly graphic more so than this show. And I didn't watch it, but I loved listening and I loved the plot.
You loved listening?
Yeah. I like the idea of like social experiments and messages and meanings behind all of this. So I watched Squid Game, but when there was, a bullet somewhere in an abdomen, I turn away. I just don't look.
You just don't like seeing blood or gore.
I don't like seeing it, but the concepts are really what is fascinating to me.
So yeah, it did kind of, I wonder if you feel the same way. It felt to me like it was kind of gratuitous in a way, and maybe that's the point. But I actually found like some of the most boring parts of the show were like these prolonged sequences of people just being shot. And it's like, I kind of get it, but it was displayed in such like an over the top extreme way. Maybe that's another thing about the show. Everything is
But that's
like
the
up
point.
here and
I thought that was
extreme.
like an artistic decision, though.
Probably.
Yeah.
Yeah, because like even the acting, although I'm hearing the voice acting, so that's probably really throwing it off.
For sure.
And maybe it's just a, something it's more common in Korean cinema or TV. I don't know, but it felt like everything was acted like at 11. Everyone was like kind of screaming. A lot of lines are basically screamed. And I know it's an intense situation. It makes sense people are behaving intensely, but it almost made the show feel kind of strangely comical in a way,
But maybe
which was
that
weird.
was, and this is me thinking, like, maybe that was intentional because they're trying to make a commentary on how comical, how fucked up in real life, maybe. I mean, they're exaggerating this in film. But, like, we do things sometimes where we don't realize something is bad until a bunch of people have to die, for example. And maybe we're not talking about deaths, but, like, a lot of harm is caused sometimes in society before we realize we need to make a change. And so I think the exaggeration of that and the showcasing of it at level 11 was kind of important to emphasize that point from an artistic perspective.
Maybe. It does make it feel a little sort of cartoonish, though, and surreal in a way, which isn't necessarily
it's a fantasy
criticism.
world. It's like Hunger Games meets Nintendo, I guess. But like that's the point. So it didn't put me off to see like very emotive acting or
People might be mad if we don't acknowledge too. Apparently, there's some pretty strong influences from like manga or animes that heavily influenced our people are concluding that anyway. I hear what you mean. It is like a completely different thing, but I have to admit, after watching it, I remember, we watched Parasite when it came out. What was that? A couple of years ago, which hits on a lot of similar themes and sort of class disparity, wealth, inequality. And I just thought like that was such a brilliant, like nuanced movie. And this just felt like the kind of like the junk food version of that in a way.
Yeah, but sometimes you need I don't like referring to it as the junk food version, but I hear what you're saying. But sometimes
probably too harsh.
You need that exaggerated view to capture people's attention and to make them interested and to really drive home a point. And from an artistic, stylistic perspective, I think it worked with the visuals and the like sets they were creating, which were mostly real sets, by the way. I watched like the behind the scenes.
Oh, yeah?
Most of it was not green screen. Like they actually built, some of it was green screen, but a lot of it was real, and it was kind of incredible to see the behind the scenes. So
that would be interesting,
amazing.
Especially for some of the games.
I was reading that the actors on the glass floor challenge, where they had to jump on tempered or not tempered glass, that was real glass. Obviously, it was not glass that would actually break in real life, but they were a meter off the ground filming that for real. So and there was like, something to catch them.
It's a meter, like 3 feet.
Yeah, sure. Sorry, conversions. But like the actors expressed in an interview that they were actually kind of scared. Like it wasn't, and I guess it helped them act and emote that. But the sets were incredible, and they weren't just like fake. So acting in that might have felt more real and authentic in a sense. So I think the actors, at least the ones I saw in interviews, like said that they enjoyed it, although they were scared.
I bet that makes a huge difference. If you've ever seen like behind the scenes of, I know you're not into superhero movies, but if you ever see behind the scenes of filming superhero movies, I find it like depressing because it's just them in a green box. Yeah. Like there's barely anything there a lot of the time. And it's just like, wow, like making that movie, the result is incredibly, and the visuals are amazing, but like most of it is done in a computer, and it's just Robert Downey Jr. talking to Chris Evans on a green stage in a studio somewhere. Yeah,
so the fact that these were mostly real sets makes me appreciate it that much more from an effort stylistic. And anyways, that's just the stylistic
that's
look
interesting.
At it. I want to talk about crime. Yes, because I found that element of it interesting. Is that one of the side effects, one of the symptoms of being someone in a vulnerable position where you don't have access to resources or access to, income or wages, is why people turn to crime. And I think in the very beginning, you kind of saw that the main character was caught up in things that are arguably like some kind of criminal activity going on where he had like he owed money, and there was other stories with the other characters that had a similar inference there. And I think
he owed money to loan sharks who were willing to kill him if he didn't pay it back.
Right.
I don't know if he committed any.
Sorry, I don't mean him specifically. I mean all of the characters in some respects were involved in some kind of
illicit behavior of
right.
like gambling, the loan shark. Yeah,
I think what's important to understand, and this is something that is like driven home in first year criminology, is that crime is often not something that you just choose to do because you want to be a criminal and be a bad person, or you want to be a psychopath, right? For example, it's often because you have no other alternative. You're in a position where you don't have access to resources. You need to feed your family. You haven't had the education or learning experience to know what is the best decision to do, and you don't know where to turn for help. So I think the backstory of a lot of these characters kind of showed that crime wasn't really a decision they like wanted to make as bad people. It was a result of their circumstances. So I think that's like a secondary lesson that you can take away from this too.
Yeah, and I think it's broader than crime even. It's just like these people are having to rely, without access to money, they're having to rely on more illicit or underground or alternative, non-mainstream, middle class, upper class ways
because
of
it's the only
surviving.
option they have to survive.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Crim 101.
Yeah. Okay. Let's talk about the old man. 'Cause
Yes,
I know
please.
we kind of debated this, and Ben rewatched that scene with the old man.
Yeah.
So the old man is player one.
Yeah, so player one, huge spoiler, it turns out that, he has a brain tumor. The guy who started the games is dying. He's an old man. I already explained his motivation for doing it. And it is revealed in the last episode that he was the creator, but he was a player in the game.
He participated in the death games.
So he has player one. I knew there was something up with him the moment he's introduced, because he's like far older than everyone else there. He has the number one. I thought there might be a twist, like he had played before and like kept choosing to play
like
to show how perverse it is that some people like this, something like that. But yeah, it turns out he, being close to death, to just try to feel something or anything, he wanted to put himself back in the game.
So he is a creator and a very rich person, which we find out later. But throughout episode 1 through 8, you think he's like
desperate man,
desperate poor
game.
Guy playing along with the players.
And it definitely plays to your sympathies when you think he is killed in one of the episodes, pretty on an emotional way. And he is very much the emotional core. Anyway,
so
what was your question?
At the end of it, he gives an explanation to the winner a year later after the games have concluded. The winner meets up with the old man, who's the creator. And then the winner learns that the old man is still alive because he thought he had died, and he actually cared about him because they grew a friendship during the games. So he learns that he's still alive, and then the old man reveals that it was him who created it. Yeah. And so the winner asks, why? And the old man's explanation was that people who have no money and people who have the most money have something in common. And that's that they are both lost. And his explanation for that is that the very rich people have so much money they don't know what to do with. And so they get bored.
Yeah, there's no joy in life.
There's no joy in life anymore because money has less meaning when you have too much of it. This is his argument.
How much money do you think you need before the joy just
I know, like, it could be a translation thing, but I agree with Ben. Like, I found that kind of weak. I'm like, okay, this sounds a little...
Well, there's a famous... Like, I saw someone did a review of the series, and they alluded to this. I can't remember who it was, but there's a famous, like, Twilight Zone episode where some guy dies... And he thinks he's gone to heaven because everything is great. He gets everything he wants, all the women, all the money he wants. But then he slowly realizes that is hell. Because when everything is given to you, there's no challenge in life or anything. Yeah. There's no opportunity to really do anything. Everything is just boring. So like there is sort of an interesting sort of like philosophical idea there. But again, I know we sort of talked about this already. The idea that like, yeah, we were so bored because we had so much money and like I could buy whatever food and travel I wanted. So I just started killing poor people to see if that would make me feel something. That to me just felt like the weak
But
jump.
then he decided to play with the players as if he was a poor, vulnerable person. And this is what I think is more interesting than just that kind of weak argument, is because he's like, well, I wanted to feel again. And so
Yeah.
I wanted to feel what it was like to be a poor person in a vulnerable situation. However, he always had an advantage because he was never actually going to die,
Well, I guess
right?
this
This
might
is up
be
for debate.
open to interpretation, but is he role playing in the game or was he actually at risk of dying? I think a lot of people have picked apart
Well,
the
they
show.
pretended to kill him and they didn't actually kill him.
Well, that's
so
certainly
doesn't
true.
that tell you enough
Okay,
that he was
you're right.
probably never going to
He
die?
was really just role playing.
And so
or
this
cosplaying
reminds
it.
me of like this sick idea that sometimes you see rich people, including like some influencers I can think of, who put on an act for the benefit of their subscribers as if they are poor or not doing well, just to relate to them, to feel like, oh, I'm on your level, and then but they're not, because they can always step out of that role if they want to.
Well, see, yeah, like when there was a trend of like, I worked at a fast food restaurant for a day.
Yeah, that's what
Like,
it reminded me
when
of.
you know you can walk out the door at any time, like you
So,
don't actually know
as
what
much
that's
as
like.
the series like wants you to care about and try and, I don't know, like sympathize with the old man.
I don't think it
no,
does.
I feel like it did. Like I did feel like bad for the old man, and then I was like, wait, what did you just do? But but like, yeah, like I couldn't help feeling at the end, wait, so you just duped everyone because you were bored and everyone else died and you knew you were never going to have to die. But I'm
Terrible
glad you got a
person.
thrill out of this. And it just kind of made me think
Oh,
of
it's
like,
awful. He's an awful
It's
person.
awful, but it made me think of when people who are rich pretend to be poor as some kind of, not like poor, but you know, some level of like relating to their audience more. I guess that's just where my head goes.
Sure.
Because it like, they think it does them favors to relate to the people and they think they are perceived better. And it's like role playing fun for them, but they can always step out of that role. And that's why it will never be fair.
Yes.
Mm-hmm.
What do you think of the fan theory that the old man is Ji-hoon's father? Have you seen this? Have you heard about this?
Oh, I have not heard of that.
So there's a few little subtle moments in the show. Like at one point, the main character, like he can't drink milk. He asks if he can have like a milk alternative, and the old man like laughs and goes like, "Oh, like your father must have beat you because I beat my kid for doing that or saying that." And there's this weird moment they kind of like and then in the marble game where you think the old man dies, they're both like, this neighborhood looks really familiar.
Yeah.
And they're looking at each other like, yeah, like I think I grew up here. It's almost,
But a lot of the characters said that because it was supposed to represent the alleyways of.
I thought
Where
maybe
they
they
live
might be hinting at something there. It's one of those
Well,
kind
it's
of
even
fun.
more fucked up then.
I know. It's just a fun fan theory.
Invite
It's
your
probably
kid to
not
die.
true.
Like, yeah, that's kind. Unless he was rigging it the whole time, so to help his kid win.
No, I don't think maybe he's like testing him to see if he could take over the game, because I don't think you ever really know
Is
the
that
main
season
character's
2?
father. They're both separated from their children because they're busy gambling. Like there's some interesting parallels to the two of them if you think
Right.
about
So
it.
the main character had a daughter or has
Mm-hmm.
a daughter, and you note in the backstory that he's an absent father for
Yeah,
the most
and
part.
his motivation for playing the game and winning the money is so he can not be a deadbeat dad, partially to also to support his mother and a few other things too.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, he is presented as this like kind of delinquent kind of piece of shit. Honestly, he was just like,
And then at the very end, when he has the decision to, like, he's on the phone talking as if he's going to go give his kid a gift.
yeah.
And then he calls Squid Game people.
Well, yeah, and I think the implication is he wants to,
Stop it.
yeah, fight against it. But again, it is kind of choosing the game over your kid again, isn't it?
And I'm not sure what he wants to accomplish by going back to the game. Maybe that's season 2.
They've certainly left the door open to a, yeah. They're going to make a second series. Almost feel bad for the creator of the show because there's just going to be so much pressure on.
Oh, yeah. It's like Stranger Things.
Yeah, you
Yeah.
often see when there's a hugely successful first season of something out of nowhere.
13 Reasons Why, and that went downhill.
Yeah, that one kind of always had its problems, I think.
I think it's for a specific audience, but the first season was well received isn't the best word, but it was highly watched, and there was a lot of
and then
lessons that kind of came out of it.
They feel rushed to do a second one, right? And there's a lot of pressure from students. For me, True Detective is the example.
Yeah, that's
the first season of True Detective might be one of the single best seasons of television ever.
It was great.
And then the guy was like rushed to do another season, and the second season is just like I didn't even get through it. It just like wasn't good.
I watched the second and the third, and the first was definitely the best.
I heard the third was all right. I haven't watched it.
It was better. It was more well thought out, but it was slow. It was very slow paced.
Okay.
In my opinion. But on the Squid Game, I did want to talk about the role of the guards, which is kind of a secondary thing that like I don't think the main headlines talk about. So people have speculated that initially when people are recruited to come into the Squid Game, they're given an option of like a blue piece of paper that you play with or a red one.
Oh, by the recruiter.
But the recruiter. And the speculation is if you pick blue, you'll become a player, and if you pick red, you'll become a guard. But what we don't see is the process by which you become a guard. All we know is that there's all these people dressed in red, like myself. I wore my squid gear.
Are you a guard today?
I'm a guard today.
Okay.
But we know nothing about them and their motivations, why they're there. Are they hostages? Like, is their family being held up and that's why they're there? Like, what is their reasoning?
That's a really interesting question because it doesn't seem like they really know what's going on
They're just following directions.
I think it's sort of implied they're just like young soldiers. They're young soldiers following directions who aren't really questioning what they're doing. And I guess there's a weird side story about like organ harvesting by them. So I thought that was like a sort of interesting idea that even those people participating on the system for that side are trying to extract value out of anything they can, which is literally just picking apart the bodies of the people dying in the game.
But doesn't that make you think that the guards too are in their other lives outside of the game very vulnerable and they don't have many options if they're willing to A, participate in a game that involves them murdering people, and B, they feel this need to extract more value out of the dead?
I would totally buy that theory that they were also recruited into the game.
That they're also being exploited. They're also a vulnerable class of people. And so I wonder if there's a season 2, you learn more about the guards and you learn that they too are part of this underclass. They're just being used by the upper class.
Maybe. I guess we'll find out. Season 2 of Squid Game, like 2023. I don't know.
Yeah.
All right, Christine, how many peelies out of 10 do you give Squid Game?
How many peelies?
We need a rating system for the pod if we're going to talk about things we watch, you know?
What kind of peelies?
That doesn't matter.
Like full clean peelies?
We're really complicating
Peelies
this
that
system.
I put in my peelie bag?
Was
peelies?
Was it a perfect peelie, a clean peelie, kind of rough peelie, or bad peelie?
I think it was like an 8 out of 10 good, clean peelies for my peelie bag. Yeah. Like I agree with you that there's like some exaggeration. It's a little, but I think from an artistic style, I enjoyed it. And I really liked that there's multiple different layers of messaging you can take away from this. And I like what I think is the most important message that we discussed previously, which is there is no such thing as true equal opportunity, and to pretend like there is willful ignorance, and you must be in a position that of privilege if you're saying that. So be kind to everyone also is another message.
It's the moral of the story.
Try and if you can't understand someone else's social situation and why they have a hardship, then consider yourself lucky.
And you know what? I appreciate that they didn't just make poor people like completely sympathetic victims. Like they showed you that these people were flawed and some of them are criminals and some of them have racist views. And you know what I mean? It wasn't just like rich people. I thought they played the rich people evil card a little too strong.
The rich people were depicted as like gross dumbasses.
Yeah, but they didn't just make the poor underclass people like purely victims. They kind of depicted them with a little more nuance, I thought, which is a good thing. Yeah. And you liked it. I liked it. Maybe not quite as much as you.
How many peelies out of 10?
Like 7 banana peels out of 10, maybe.
7 bananas? Are bananas good?
I mean, 7 sounds much worse than 8, doesn't it? I guess I'll say clearly a lot of people like the show. And I think one thing that really works in the show's favor is it can be enjoyed on a bunch of different levels. And I think it's trending to be like the most successful Netflix series ever. And that might have partially something to do with it tapping into an international audience, but also the North American audience. But I think there's something about it that it can be enjoyed if you're just sort of into like torture porn. You could kind of just watch it purely from like a people being killed perspective. There's the people who are interested in what it says about social class dynamics. Like there's just sort of the more mystery element of what's going on and sort of finding out about it. So I feel like it hits a bunch of different notes for different people, and that's kind of what works for it.
Yeah, I think that's a really good point, because I have no desire to watch gore or people dying, like, just for fun. But I appreciate the intricacies of, like, why this is happening, the comparison to, like, capitalism and the exploitation of vulnerable people. And I think that, like, students of any kind, right, like, if this relates to your studies in any way, if you're in social humanities, this is a really interesting essay topic to write about, if you're allowed to write about.
Well, I don't know if they
series.
can just choose a movie to write.
There was a lot of those opportunities when I was in school.
It's interesting that it's a useful device to try to teach sociological
concepts. I think that's a good thing. And if it takes some, like, you know, exaggerated violence with cool visuals to get you interested in these concepts, I don't think that's a bad thing. If you can, like, learn more about social systems and it applies somehow to you, and like, oh, now I get it. So it's not bad.
This isn't really a comment on Squid Game, but like one thing I wanted to point out are just streaming a series like this, and I'm assuming most people basically just binge watched it. Episodes having like cliffhanger endings is a really strange thing in the era of streaming, right? Or I guess it's not strange at all. It kind of makes perfect sense. Like,
you got to continue.
It means you're not going to leave
You're not
the
going to sleep
TV.
tonight.
You're staying on Netflix,
Continue
right?
watching? Yes.
But I feel like, was this always the case that so many... Is it happening more now with streaming? Like, I don't know. I feel like these cliffhanger endings are happening too much. And I remember, like, I used to be into The Walking Dead. We watched that show a little bit back in the day. And some of the cliffhangers were just so stupid, and like ending like a season finale with a cliffhanger, knowing you're going to have to wait months to see the resolution of who got hit with a baseball bat. Like I don't know. It kind of drives me nuts. I just wanted to rant about that.
It's the opposite of clickbait. It's cliffbait, because they got to hold on to you for the next return. So they'll make you wait.
It can be done artfully in a way that totally works creatively, but I guess my argument, or what really bothers me, when it's clearly just done in a way of keeping you watching, when it doesn't really fit the pacing of the show, right? Mm-hmm. Like for The Walking Dead, I'm pretty sure they just did that because they knew that would entice more people to tune in for the season premiere months later, not that it really made sense in the arc of the season to end at that moment. And I even kind of felt it in Squid Game a little bit too. Like, I thought the pacing of the second last, it was super strange the way the very last episode ends, and the sort of battle royale type game ends on a bit of like an anticlimactic, like the final round of the game sort of ends within the first few minutes of the last episode. And I just thought that pacing seemed really strange to me. I liked all the stuff after and seeing him after the game, but I thought that could have just been its own episode, and you end the game at the end of the episode before. Maybe I've edited too many YouTube videos.
I don't know. Yeah. I think, as you said, it matters less if people are watching multiple episodes together. Yeah. So
it's like a 9-hour
it doesn't
movie
really
then.
matter anymore.
Yeah.
Which character would you be if you were in the Squid Game? Who do you relate to the most based on their decision making in the game?
That's
like
interesting.
Which player would you be?
So
What's your moral code, Ben?
There's basically two villains in the show.
Just two?
Well,
You could be a VIP
of
too.
the players, there's two that are sort of representing different kinds of bad people, I would say, prominently. Like, there's a literal criminal thug guy, who, again, is a little cartoonish, who literally just uses brute force he's going to force people to do things for him, right?
Yeah.
But then there's the guy who's there because he committed a bunch of financial fraud.
White collar crime.
I call it, and he's a very smart guy, and his style of winning the game is like tricking people through outsmarting them and manipulating people. Yeah. I don't think I could be as terrible as that guy, but in a very desperate situation, I think I'd be somewhere in between him and the main character, who couldn't really bring himself to kill people and things like that. But I would definitely think I would try to play the game more like smartly, strategically than,
You would trick someone into thinking they have marbles.
Maybe I might. This is a self-report. I might put rocks in your bag.
I feel like
I
would not survive for sure. I'd die. I related most to the secondary woman character who was the little bit of a friend of the main female character. The one who she played marbles with. There was like the two women who played marbles together, and then the one explained they each explained their life story to each other and learned that they both have had fucked up lives, right? Like the hardships they've endured. But then the one who ends up dying ultimately says that the other girl has hope because she still has a family left to go back to. And she felt, and then the girl who ended up dying said, like, you deserve to stay here more than I do. So I'm not going to fight because what's the point if one of us has to go? And I feel like that might be me. And part of that is because it's very difficult for me to kill someone. That's stupid. But like, I would have a really hard time doing that in the first place. And then secondly, if you did hear a story where someone does have more hope or potential than you, I feel like I would be someone who would back down as a result and say, okay.
You think you'd be selfless like that, and but you have Menchie and Zyler and me.
I'm not being realistic, but just like if my story compared to someone else's was imbalanced in that way, I would probably couple that with the idea that I don't want to fight either because it's not in my personality, and because I have this fear of like fighting or hurting others, I wouldn't do well anyways. So what is the point? Would probably be my logic.
The marble episode, and particularly the exchange between those two women, is probably the best part of the show, and I actually think they are the best characters.
Squid Squad. They'd be on my Squid Squad.
Yeah, that was probably my favorite part. Like, and that was a really like real interesting conversation between them, and it showed the differences in like their cultural upbringings. One of them escaped North Korea. The other one kind of knows these cultural relevant references. The other doesn't. And I thought I liked them, and they were more interesting characters than the main characters in a way, I thought.
Yeah, the show had an interesting depiction of women with that other character who was kind of like the trope for the annoying woman. Like there was a third woman character who was, at least in the English translation, painted as like annoying, clingy, wouldn't back down from like the guy. Like she was interested in him on like a sexual level and was trying to use that.
Well, she was just using.
She was maybe, but like it was also depicted as like no one wanted her on their team, not just that the guy she was interested in.
Sure.
Like she was annoying to everyone, and they were all trying to be like, "Don't look at me, like I don't want to deal with you."
Yeah, I think this is a pretty polarizing character. I think. Most people are saying like you're supposed to find her unbearable, and the actor did a good job in portraying her that way. But again, like that might be the worst example of, maybe it's the dubs, but like it was almost like cartoonishly awful and abrasive and annoying, and it just kind of took me out of the show a little bit. That character.
It was very much a trope, I think.
Yeah, and like so is the thug guy. Like the show subtlety is not what this show is.
Right, they were trying to be very like, here's the types of people we see in life on average stereotypes, right? Like that was their goal, I think.
Okay, so you don't think you would survive Squid Game, but
no.
Let's say if you could pick, what is the childhood game that Cristine would pick if she was trying to survive Squid Game?
Maybe hopscotch.
Yeah.
Preferably
Think
not
you'd
with
beat some-
glass, but I used to be good at hopscotch.
Okay.
I do a lot of foot dances.
Yeah. I wonder if, like, I'm trying to think what I played as a kid. It would be weird, like,
Donkey Kong?
Donkey Kong. Yeah, I'll pick Donkey
You'd be number
Kong.
10.
You know, it'd be funny if they just, like, my brain went to, like, the sports I played as a kid. I wonder how much more interesting sports would be if you knew the losing team was just going to be executed, you know?
Oh, that's not equal opportunity, though. What if you're, like, not good at
Well, this is an equal
athletics?
opportunity. What if you got picked first to go in the glass
I know.
stepping game?
Yeah, I agree with you. Yeah, but the choice was up to you when you picked the number.
Okay.
You just didn't know the implications of that choice, so it's not really a choice. But yes, that's what we are supposed to take away from it.
Okay.
I thought the relations between the players was also really interesting, though. And I think if you look at it as a distraction, a manufactured distraction by the VIPs, by the game and the systems creating this environment, the players at first maybe would have like sided with each other, like, get us out of here, or we don't want to die and we're all here together. Over time, you started to see those relationships disintegrate because people developed alliances, they got mad at each other, they started attacking each other. And I think that's kind of another lesson where the distractions that can happen from the more vulnerable groups in society, like taking out their anger at each other rather than grouping together and looking up at the infrastructure that is ultimately causing or perpetuating their
Yeah, but
downfall.
they have no way of fighting back against that.
Could there have been a way if they all
If they
agreed?
had all banded together.
I just mean, like, there was so
Yeah.
much distraction that as a viewer, you get frustrated. Like, why are these people all stabbing each other in the middle of the night? This is so unnecessary.
Yeah, if they all
right?
worked together, could they overtake some of those guards? Yeah,
Yeah.
interesting. Well, okay, we'll be tuning in for season 2, I guess.
Yeah. So I liked it. I don't know if it was your favorite.
No, it was
but-
good. I watched it.
Yeah.
I liked it. All right,
But, yeah.
Simply. Any other news this week? Anything you want to share? It's your birthday coming up.
It's my birthday.
What do you want for your birthday?
I don't want to play games.
You don't?
No games.
You want to play Monopoly or something?
No, like literally, I don't want to play another game.
We could do a
after
puzzle?
watching it. No. What if I die?
Loser doesn't have to do anything bad.
Loser doesn't have to die. Damn. Yeah, so it is my birthday coming up. So you may have seen some birthday teasers for Holo Taco.
Oh, okay.
Are you excited, Ben?
Very excited.
Ben has a lot to be excited about, too.
Okay. All right, if you're just gonna... Okay,
Do you want me to spill all the tea, or are you going to stop me before I do?
All right, thanks everybody for watching. We'll see you next Taco Tuesday.
All right, everyone. Thanks so much for watching.
See y'all later.
See y'all later. Bye.
A weird ending.